אוקיי, שוקרן, תודה רבה. עופר, תודה רבה. ליאנה, תודה רבה לכל המארגנים, למחלקה לארכיאולוגיה, לרשות העתיקות. אני מאוד שמח להיות כאן. אני באמת לא מתעסק בארכיאולוגיה, אבל אני חושב שהארכיאולוגיה היא אקט פוליטי, ויש בה הרבה ממדים פוליטיים. אני אדבר היום קצת על חלק ממחקר שעשיתי לאחרונה, אחרי שני הסיפורים מרתקים ששמענו עליהם, על דוואימה, קריית הדוואימה, וגם על הסיפור של עוג'ל חפיר. ואני אדבר קצת על שיטור, על קולוניאליזם, על אמפייר. אז אני אעבור גם לאנגלית בהזדמנות הזו. So what I would like to do here is basically to touch some quick aspects about imperialism, about empire, especially about the whole idea of policing. I think we had a great presentation about Ojal Hafir and the case of the policing and the train system, but I'd like to based on my Columbia book that has been translated recently into Arabic about the Bnegab and the Transjordan region, I would like to draw some important aspects regarding the issue of policing and also the what's so-called the colonial policing, as well as how, in fact, the British used the local indigenous communities, the local indigenous knowledge for the service of empire, and the whole idea of what the local indigenous communities here in the Naqab, in the Negev, have perceived those colonial enterprise as well as those colonial policies, especially when it comes to the police boss. But I would like to mention quickly that this research, as part of the book and a paper that has been recently published by the Imperial and Commonwealth History Journal, is based on the archival records of the Palestine Exploration Fund. I'm not obviously I'm not an archaeologist, but I've used archaeology in my political context as well as the book. So I relied on some important insights from a newspaper called Empire News, which is an amazing story to tell how the British perceived this region and how those in this particular case, the newspaper of Empire told the story of policing, okay, the policing in the Middle East and policing the frontiers and the borders. I also used local records of the British and Irish policing who basically came all the way from Ireland, from Dublin as well as Belfast to police the frontiers of Palestine, the southern part of Palestine in particular, as well as some records from the British officials who served in Palestine. And I interviewed one of them a few years ago, who was the district commissioner of Beersheba, who ran the police himself. Lord Oxford, on the image there, you can see this particular picture of Lord Oxford himself and one of the local Bedouin police here. I also combine the oral history, the orality. Where is the oral history when we come to speak about Dawaima, for example, as well as Awj al-Hafir? It's also important. I would like to draw your attention to the story that is forgotten sometimes. What is the story of the local village? What is the story of the local police station? What the people say, in fact, about those police stations. And for this purpose, I did a lot of interviews with British officials, with also Israeli military governors, as well as the local Bedouin themselves. So what is the whole idea of policing? Why the British were in fact eager to control the frontiers of empire? The whole idea came from, obviously, from India, from Belfast, to rule the indigenous communities, to control the frontiers, as well as to police those regions in the Middle East. Why the frontier was a significant component for the British colonialism. And I think lots of those ideas also were practiced in Iraq, as you can see, as well as those experts who basically came all the way from India, like Charles Stiggett himself. So they used what's so-called the RAF, the British Air Force, to police the borders using aircrafts, as well as other methods that are linked to the whole idea of the RAF in the Middle East That was the colonial policy of the British to rule those indigenous communities, especially those Bedouin communities who moved from across the border of the new empire in the region, or also those people who challenged the whole idea of a modern state or the colonial state borders after Sykes-Picot. As well as you can see many of those images that has been published by the police records in King's College in London, which I've looked at in the last few months, and also I'm writing about those methods of policing the frontiers and the borders. And obviously, why the Negev? Why this was an important territory for the British? Obviously, the British have seen this significant component of controlling the frontiers of southern Palestine, the Negev, as well as Sinai and Transjordan, as a significant component of their colonial attitudes towards the region. And as you can see, the citation here from Jarvis himself, who was the governor of Sinai. Why this region is important, significant for trade routes, for as well linking the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, as well as Palestine, Egypt, and Syria. So that's a kind of the pure colonial aspects of controlling this region in particular, because colonialism has involved a lot of economic purposes, as well as economic methods of controlling the region. So the whole idea of the policing has developed obviously by the British themselves. It's called the Palestine Police. As we know, the Palestine Police have been used to control the local communities in Palestine and to suppress the revolt. But this idea has developed, in fact, to the south, to the Negev, and as well as linking it to the whole idea of the frontiers of Sinai and Transjordan, as well as even Saudi Arabia and Iraq. So the idea here of the desert patrol, why the British had invented this desert patrol as part, in fact, of the Palestine Police practice and mechanisms. So you can see those tribes were recruited, in fact, from to the policing system from the desert, from the tribes in Beersheba, as well as Transjordan, and even in Saudi Arabia and Iraq. And the idea here, as you can see, the first citation, why they use this mechanism of controlling the frontiers and the borders is obviously linked to colonialism. The desert patrol is responsible for the security of about 200 miles of the Iraqi petroleum companies from the Hijaz railway to the Iraqi frontiers. Just tells the story why the British have invented this idea of controlling the frontiers. And the second aspect, which is the second citation, as you see here, it's basically to preserve the colonial law and order in camps, as they called it, spread over 200 miles of desert and occupied by nearly 4,000 laborers, including, in fact, mixed population of British and other engineers and officials, which means there is the economic component of colonialism in those attitudes. And obviously, the British have developed the cooperation between the Bedouin policing in the Negev here and Transjordan, as well as across the desert with Saudi Arabia, as well as cooperation with the RAF, the British Air Force, as I mentioned earlier. That's the mechanism of controlling the region. So, in fact, there are lots of important examples why they recruited, in fact, those Bedouins from the tribes themselves, as well as we can see that there were some Jewish who were recruited to the Palestine Police, in fact, here in the Negev, as well as British officials for the purpose of controlling these regions. The British have involved the expertise of the Oriental experts, in fact, who were basically came all the way from Ireland and Belfast, including the Brigadier Broadhurst, as well as Lord Oxford himself, who was the son of the British Prime Minister Herbert Henry Asquith, in fact. So those came all the way from Britain, from Ireland, from Belfast to train the Bedouin police in here, including Glab Pasha himself of Transjordan, okay? For the British, they have seen this area of Transjordan and Sinai and the Negev as one single, in fact, problem, as they put the citation from the British records here. So the frontiers of empire were important, significant for the British themselves, and you can see those beautiful images from the archives in London and the policing archives in King's College. Is basically the Mudawwara police post, which is across the Jordan Valley today, as well as a picture from those mixed Bedouin communities who came from Transjordan and even from Iraq and Saudi Arabia to serve in the frontiers empire services, which is a pure colonial policies toward those people in terms of fragmenting them from the urban communities as well as from the rest of the Palestinian communities. And you can see those images as well from the archives and from the Lord Oxford images. The district commissioner of Beersheba is basically telling the story how they toured the desert, those policing the cavalry in particular, and how they crossed the border, and also cooperated with Transjordan and the Desert Patrol of Transjordan, and also recruited the high-ranking policemen from the tribal leaders' families in particular, which is a pure colonial policies that the British have used in Africa, as well as in Burma and Malaysia and many other contexts as well. So that's the case here in Beersheba, or in the Negev. So the image here you can see on the left is the most beautiful image you can see in the archival records of London is about the Saraya of Beersheba. This is the building that has run basically the system of policing here in the Negev, in Beersheba, and obviously the mosque on the other side. But the image of the Saraya used to be called the Saraya building, the Connaught of Beersheba. However, the British have changed it to the Tigert building later on, the Charles Tigert building. All over the country here in Israel today, we have the Tigert buildings. And that's the story behind Charles Tigert, which was an incredible story of changing the Ottoman history as well. So from Beersheba, they used to run a few police posts across the desert. And those police posts included Asluj, Auj al-Hafir, which has been mentioned here earlier, Kornob, Mimshit, Khalasa, Halutza, Ain Hosb, Ain Hatseva. Those police posts across the desert and across the frontiers was significant for the component of controlling the frontiers of empire. Ain Gdayan, Rashrash, which is Eilat today, Tel al-Malah, okay, Nevatim, Tel Malhata, which has been mentioned earlier today, Beersheba, the main station, Al-Imara, which is Kibbutz Urim today, and Ras Zuwaira, further Arad. So those are where significant component of policing the desert and policing the frontiers, and they were run from Beersheba. This is the image of Beersheba. This is the image of Beersheba during the late Ottoman times, which is one of the most significant pictures we have ever seen about Beersheba. And it tells the story of empire, Ottoman and British Empire, and tells the story also of a city, as a Palestinian Arab city that has been marginalized in the literature, that tells the story of many, in fact, Palestinians themselves that lived in this area. And you can see all those images and the written acronyms of Arabic words are still on the houses of the Beersheba in the old city, which tells even the establishment date of those houses. Why they use those police posts? Obviously, it's for observation. Obviously, it's also for imposing order. And I think there are many other purposes for those police posts. In fact, is to inspect the people, to tax them as well. Inspection, taxation, as well as touring the desert, even becoming a tool of assistance to the archaeologists who came to the region, as well as the British travel writers who were accompanied always by those Bedouin themselves. So the Bedouin police themselves became a tool for the empire to control the region, to produce censuses, to produce maps, as well as images, even for ecological purposes, which is an amazing story of colonialism and how they used the colonial methods of colonizing the knowledge of the people themselves in this area. A very important story that has emerged from those conversations and archives is also about the story of the tell. We have heard a lot today, the tell, but the tell in those Bedouin concepts on the right, it's Tell Abu Jaber, okay? If you know, obviously you know this from the archival records, but it's close to Fallujah, okay? It's Summit Bulugot. It's the story of Tell Abu Jaber has been mentioned in the archival records here, as you can see, okay? As well as Tell al-Milh, as well as Tell al-Kseife. The Tell in the Bedouin perception is a story of a village, is a story of a neighborhood, is a story of a cemetery that used to exist in this area, is a story of economy, is a story of even of a land ownership. That's an important image that I will tell not only about the policing, and also you can see the archival records that tells the story of the Tell, okay? There are lots of examples here. The Tel Zakaria, for example, the case of Amatzia has been mentioned here in Lachish. So what is the story of the Tel in the local Arab perspectives or the Bedouin perspectives is an important example. Another important mention here from the archival records of the Palestine Exploration Fund is the case of Tel al-Milah. This is Zdeni Batim Mayom, okay? But the Tel is there. The Tel is associated with the history of the village. It's a beautiful part of the history of the village, and also the watering site. You can see the watering site from the late Ottoman times here in Palestine that tells there is a village here that has a story. The Tel al-Milah, the Tel of Salt, tells the story of the village also from the perspective of the local indigenous community, and also tells the story of the watering sites. The Tel and the police post marks a significant component of the watering sites in this region. And in fact, many people came from the different tribes to the Tel and to the watering sites, okay, as a significant component of their subsidiary as well as their history. And those are two beautiful images from Tel al-Milah, okay? The police post in Tel al-Milah, those two images of the police post. The police post tells an important story, in fact, of merchants, of economy. It has been mentioned earlier, the dynamics between the local Bedouin communities and the Arab communities of Gaza and Hebron. They all came around this area of the police post and the Tel and the watering site. So that's an important aspect of the police post, that it was not only for security and for borders, but it was a moment of interaction between the colonial policies and also with the local communities. Assemblages, trade center, and exchange of economy used to be run around the Tel. So, and the police station itself. The Tel story also represents a very important story of cemeteries as well. If you go to Tel al-Milah, you can see also the cemetery. Thousands of graves are still entered today in the military airport that people can visit once a year, in fact, before the holidays. But there is a story of the Tel that is associated also with the cemetery of Tel al-Milah, okay, which is a beautiful story of the mills as well. The Tel also, and the police post, tells the story of the mill floors, as well as the economic dynamics between Hebron, Gaza, and Beersheba that used to come to this police station, as well as to the mill, okay, which is an important component. The image here, in fact, is the image of the mill that the Hebronites have built it here in Tel al-Milah, and it has been built as a cooperation aspect between the Bedouin themselves and the Hebronites who came for merchant purposes here. Another beautiful story of Kurnob, Memshit. What is the story of Memshit in the local Arab communities' stories? For example, I will give a few comments here about Kurnob, and those police post images are in Kurnob, and those figures from the police themselves came from the different tribes, and I know the names. I know I have followed up with the story of those policemen who came from the tribes, which tells the story, in fact, of a village that existed there around Kurnob. And I tell you just some examples about the role of this site in the imagination of the archives, as well as the local Bedouin narratives. For example, in 1946, a team of British officials toured the region on a census and survey mission, for example, the ecological experiments, and were accompanied by a number of Bedouin police and a Bedouin captain from the Kurnob police post, okay? The team was eager to gain more data and knowledge of the area and the tribes, which could be achieved only with the aid of the local Bedouin police and the frontier force police. The Bedouin police themselves facilitated the team work in important sites in Beersheba district, as well as Kurnob. Another example, in 1932, British officials arrived from Jaffa for survey and inspection of the tribes, trying to identify their exact location. The team, for example, was accompanied by local chief from Kurnob, Memshit, then toured the frontier zone, stopping in Beersheba headquarters, Ojal Hafir, Qsaymeh, and Sinai, Al-Qantala, and Aqaba, which is a beautiful story of what is the role of the police station. It's not only policing the borders, but it has beyond that. And I think that's a significant component of the policing system of colonialism in the region. There is one story of colonialism, one story of imperialism. However, there is another story, which is the indigenous community local story, which presents a significant component. What is the police station about? Who served in the police station, in fact, and why the police station became an economic hub, interaction between the villages and the urban communities that they all came to the site of the tell as well as to the site of the police station itself. And that's a significant component, which is basically brings the story of the indigenous story, in fact, the indigenous story of those police posts that were, in fact, colonial purposes. However, they turned to become conflict resolution mechanism center. It became a meeting point between the British themselves and the local communities, and also to represent, lastly, the story of a village, the story of a Palestinian Arab village that existed around those police posts. I'll stop here. Thank you.